The First Empire did not begin to collapse in weakness. It began to collapse at the height of its perfection. By the reign of Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, the Akkadian Empire was no longer an experiment. It was a machine. The old Sumerian city-states were silent. Their walls were down. Their calendars were aligned. Their weights were standardized. The Gur measured grain from the mountains to the sea. For the first time in history, a ruler in one city could calculate the harvest of the city 500 miles away. The river valley had become a single economic organism, and at the center stood Akkad, a capital so powerful that its exact location no longer mattered. Its authority was everywhere. But machines do not run on glory. They run on fuel. The standing army, the 5,400 who ate daily before the king had to be fed every single day. Grain flowed north. Silver flowed south. Copper moved through deserts. Timber floated downstream. Everything was counted. Everything was taxed. Everything was linked. This was the secret of Akkadian power. Integration. If one region struggled, another supplied it. If a frontier needed reinforcement, the center dispatched it. The empire appeared unstoppable. But integration has a price. The more connected a system becomes, the less it can tolerate disruption. In a city-state, a king sees problems directly. In an empire of 100 cities, he sees reports. Reports require scribes. Scribes require housing. Housing requires rations. To supervise governors, he needed inspectors. To supervise inspectors, he needed auditors. Every layer meant more mouths, more grain, more cost. The machine was feeding itself, and it was growing heavy. The second problem was distance. The empire had stretched beyond the rivers, into mountains, into deserts, into lands where canals meant nothing. To extract silver from the north, the state spent grain feeding pack animals and soldiers. Sometimes 3 measures went out to bring 1 measure back. Expansion was no longer profitable. It was maintenance. The empire could not slow down. If tribute stopped, the army starved. If the army starved, rebellion spread. The machine required motion. It required constant extraction. It required obedience. And obedience was becoming expensive. Beneath the surface, resentment was growing. The sons of Akkad governed the southern cities. They spoke a different language. They reported to a distant capital. The temple elites had been displaced. The local gods were no longer the center of authority. The empire had unified territory, but fractured identity. And now Naram-Sin could feel it. Corruption on the frontiers. Delays in shipments. Southern unrest. The machine was no longer humming. It was vibrating. So he did something unprecedented. He changed the nature of kingship itself. He declared himself divine. In inscriptions, a star appeared before his name. The Dinge, the sign reserved for gods. This was not vanity. It was strategy. If the king is divine, rebellion becomes sacrilege. If the king is divine, taxes become sacred duty. If the king is divine, authority becomes absolute. For a moment, it worked. The art changed. Naram-Sin was carved towering above his enemies, wearing the horned helmet of divinity. He climbed mountains like a god ascending the heavens. The message was unmistakable. The empire was eternal because its ruler was eternal. But divinity carries a hidden cost. If a normal king fails, he blames the gods. If a god fails, there is no one left to blame. By claiming divinity, Naram-Sin absorbed the margin of error. Drought. His fault. Famine. His fault. Rebellion. His fault. The shield of religion became a trap. Then came the fatal decision. Naram-Sin intervened directly in Nippur, the sacred heart of Sumer. The Akur, the temple of Enlil, had once been neutral ground. No king owned it. Naram-Sin rebuilt it under imperial authority. Foundation pegs bearing his name were driven into its sacred walls. It was meant to centralize legitimacy. Instead, it broke trust. The priesthood saw desecration. The people saw sacrilege. and the story began to circulate. The curse of Agade, a myth that said the gods had withdrawn protection from the empire. It was propaganda. But propaganda only spreads when people are ready to believe it. The empire entered a new phase. Fortresses rose across the landscape. Tel Brak in the north, massive grain depots, thick defensive walls. The state consolidated wealth into fortified nodes. The geometry of power changed. The empire was no longer a flowing network. It was a series of guarded vaults. Protection for the center, distance for the periphery. Meanwhile, the soil was growing tired. The southern fields whitened with salt. Yields plateaued. The northern provinces required constant oversight. Inspectors multiplied. Audits intensified. The system had become hyper-efficient and hyper-fragile. It could win wars, it could standardize measures, it could silence rivals, but it could not tolerate uncertainty, and uncertainty was approaching. Beyond the mountains, nomadic groups were watching. The Gutians, the Amorites. They did not use standardized weights. They did not fight in phalanxes. They did not respect divine titles. They moved like wind across the edges of the empire. And wind is not something you can tax. By the end of Naram-Sin's reign, the empire stood at its zenith. Largest territory, greatest wealth, divine kingship, administrative mastery. It had solved the problem of scale, but it had traded resilience for control. The machine was magnificent, but it required perfect conditions, perfect harvests, perfect obedience, perfect climate. And history does not grant perfection for long. In the next episode, the sky changes, the rain stops, and the most advanced political system the world had ever seen discovers that it cannot negotiate with dust. The empire is at its peak. But the peak is the most dangerous place to stand.